Welcome back to the Spicy Take Sports Podcast. I'm Elijah, and we got Stone Colton, it looks like.
What's up?
What's going on, y'all? Caleb's actually getting married tomorrow, so he's
congrats to Caleb.
He's got some other stuff on the mind right now. So
he's got wedding stuff on the mind. It happens.
Wedding stuff and post-wedding stuff probably too. So he's got some stuff on his.
Oh my goodness.
Got some extra stuff on his mind. So we're just going to be doing this together tonight. He'll be back for the college football podcast. We're going to be predicting the playoff and the New Year's Six Bowls. We'll be doing that probably on the 28th or 29th, or maybe the 27th, one of those 3 days, because I'll be gone in Tennessee next week. But so today, since we've had kind of a weird set of weeks, I mean, we already got a quick little rundown. I mean, we had in college football, we had the Oklahoma State get upset, but Alabama did beat Georgia, so virtually the playoff stayed exactly the same as it was the week before. Just flipped Georgia and Alabama from 3-1. Cincinnati did get the first Group of 5 team in, so I'm happy about that.
Yeah, that was really impressive. I thought they were gonna get in. I mean, for them it was best case scenario that Georgia won, but since they got upset by Bama, they kind of squeaked in with Baylor beating Oklahoma State, which the game obviously came down to
an inch,
literally an inch of the football, and that was one of the most wild finishes I've seen recently.
Yeah, so that happened. So we ended up getting Alabama versus Cincinnati, Georgia versus Michigan. We'll get more into that once Caleb gets on the podcast. NFL, we've had a few little COVID things go on and kind of just thrown a little bit of the season off. And we'll get to that next week as well, once some of this stuff starts getting figured out with the change in the policies and stuff. But so this week, because we don't really know exactly what's going to go on with all this stuff, kind of have a little bit more clarity in a week, we decided to kind of switch it up and get more positive vibes in the sports world. And it's kind of so y'all can get to know us more too. We went through, and a few weeks ago, we had me, Caleb, and Colton on. We all said our 5 best sports moments of all time and discussed them. And it was really good, really interesting podcast.
I think I think that's changed for me now. Now number one is the Braves winning the World Series.
Yeah. Same here. So that was an awesome time. So today we decided to have another one similar to that, and so y'all can kind of get to know us a little bit more. We're going to talk about our top 5 athletes in a few different sports, and then our overall top 5 athletes of all time. These are all-time rankings, and these are not based on who we think are the best. These are just personal favorites. So yes, there's biases. That's kind of the point of this list, is the biases. We'll be going over our 5 favorite college football players, NFL players, NBA players, MLB players, and then our overall 5 favorite athletes. And these can include stuff that we've already talked about, or it can include athletes that don't fit into any of those sports that we just feel are in the list of our favorite athletes ever.
Yeah, I think we're going to start with college football first. So for me personally, college football is my favorite sport. I mean, there's football, there's basketball, there's baseball. I'm a big fan, but college football is definitely what I look forward to. Fall time of year. Football's in the air. Feels cool outside. Florida, it goes down to a whopping 85 degrees. It's nice. Yeah. But yeah, growing up, I started watching football probably around the same time you did, Elijah. Probably 05, 06.
Yeah, I grew up watching it, but college football is really when one of my athletes actually 2 of my athletes actually on this list kind of show when I first started watching college football, and I'll kind of explain that more. But yeah, 05, 06 is around the exact year that I kind of started getting into it.
So I'm going to go first with the college football one. And
you want to start with honorable mentions and go down?
Yeah. We'll do do you want to do honorable mentions now?
We'll go honorable mentions, then we'll go 5 through 1. So you can start. We can go, each of us go our turn.
Okay. So For college football, for my honorable mention, I'd probably go a player that went to a school that's not super well known. They're a Power 5 school, which is Baylor. But RG3 for me is an honorable mention for college football.
Mm.
We were talking about this earlier. He was on a middle tier team, won about 9-10 games, and may have went to a middle tier bowl as well. But won the Heisman Trophy, and he was an electric player to watch on the field. And just kind of one of those guys that had that it factor in college that could just sling it and it was just super athletic. Kind of trend on this list for me. Speaking of athletic and that can sling it. And at 5, Cameron Newton, number 5, Auburn. Kind of pains me to say that because as a Georgia fan, Auburn is, a foe, but he was so dominant in college. He was a force, 230, 240, just as fast as 80% of the defense. He was just absolutely fun to watch. Lamar Jackson, not really a lot to explain about that, what he's doing in the NFL right now. Kind of proving me wrong. I didn't think he was going to be this good of an NFL quarterback. I mean, he's good. He's getting better. His arms, his accuracy is improving. Todd Gurley for me is number 3. As a Georgia fan, I had to throw Todd Gurley in there. He, in 2012, 2013, when Georgia, if the college football playoff isn't intact in 2012, Georgia probably would have been in the playoff after they lost to Alabama that year, with Todd Gurley and Keith Marshall. But I mean, yeah, he was a super dominant quarterback, running back. If he never got hurt, he could have potentially won the Heisman in 2013 if he never tore his ACL. And then another guy that pains me to say because he's another rival of Georgia, and you mentioned this earlier, Tim Tebow. I mean, he's a great man, a great person, but he was an even better college quarterback. He was probably the most dominant quarterback I've seen at college in terms of just as dominant as Cam Newton, but he just had that willpower. He was just going to will his team to victory. And when he had the speech, the promise at Florida when they won national championship in 2008 after they lost to Ole Miss, I mean, just watching that, even as a person that despises Florida, I kind of got chills from that, and it's just really cool to see. But for me, my favorite college football player I've ever watched in person, non-Georgia football player, just in general, is Johnny Football Manziel. The man was electric. He was so exciting to watch. All 5'11", 6 foot of him. He played like he was 6'6", and he ran like he was a track field star. He wasn't even that fast. He just looked like he was faster than a lot of other people because he was so agile. And you can just kind of bob and weave in the traffic. And he was the first freshman to ever win the Heisman Trophy. He won it in 2012. He was, I believe, a true redshirt freshman, but he's still a freshman. So that rounds out my 6 players for NCAA football. But yeah, for me, Manziel is head and shoulders above everyone else I've seen at the collegiate level. What do you think about that? And what's your list?
I mean, yeah, so just going to go down kind of with your list. Robert Griffin III was, I actually just popped open NCAA football 13 the other day and was trying to break out the old recruiting, and he was on their cover, and it's just insane to think that Baylor team actually had a Heisman winner.
Yeah.
It's just because RG3 was another level. I think if he wouldn't have gotten hurt in the NFL, he would still be a star today. I mean, as a Vikings fan, we were the team that he beat in the playoffs his first year in the NFL, and he was just electric. If he wouldn't have gotten hurt, I really do think he would have been. He definitely would be football team's quarterback. Now I'll say that.
Yeah, he was just one of those guys that just caught an unlucky break. I mean, he was such a talented player coming out of college, and he was kind of that new prototype athletic running gun quarterback.
Yeah, Cam Newton. I mean, he was another. I mean, I rooted for him against Alabama because I could not stand Alabama at the time. Still can't.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
I don't like Auburn. I don't like Auburn to this day either. But Cam was just another level. I've never seen somebody that good. Like, to be honest, like that dominant. So number 4 was who for you?
Number 4. Number 4 is Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, Lamar, as a Kentucky fan, my favorite moments of him was when we beat him in his senior year when they were 8th in the country. I love that. But
was that the year Kentucky went 10-3?
Yeah. No, it was the year before that. They went 8-4, and then they upset Lamar. But
oh wow.
But yeah, so that was a great moment for me. And then The number 3, Gurley was a stud running back. Injury really did hurt him. I mean, your number 2 and number 1 I have on my list, so I'll kind of get into them more. On my list, my honorable mentions Reggie Bush. I did not like USC. Don't like USC to this day, but Reggie Bush's college highlights are stuff that you'll never see again. His run against Fresno State, where he literally ran he ran virtually 200 yards to go 40 yards and score. It was just, and he went behind his back. It was just nuts. He was in another level. Number 5, Kellen Moore. Kellen Moore was kind of my first guy that I really started truly just pulling for throughout a whole season in college football. Boise State was kind of the underdog, but they were so close to making the national championship game, even in the BCS formula. They would have been, and if it wasn't for, if they had the playoff as well. And Kellen Moore, all-time leader in winning percentage of starting quarterback in college football. And he just was he was really fun to watch. And that football knowledge is showing right now in the NFL too, as the offensive coordinator at Dallas and probably gonna be a head coach soon. Number 4, Tim Tebow, kind of the same reasons you said, just inspirational leader, loves the man as a human being. And the guy was a dominant quarterback in college. Still think he kind of got blackballed out of the NFL. Think he could have definitely had at least a job somewhere else, but apparently having an 8-4 season and a playoff win isn't good enough, but that's aside the point.
I also think that if he would have not been so stingy and just played a different position when he was still younger, he would have did much better than when he tried to make the resurgence like 7-8 years later.
Sure. Number 3, Johnny Manziel. Same reason you have a number 1, just electric. That highlight where he lost the ball and scored and still find a way to score against Alabama will be a legend forever. Loved watching him.
Yeah, the way I would say that highlight, like you said, when that was his Heisman moment when he went in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I mean, was A&M, they were ranked maybe 20, 22nd? Were they even ranked? They were ranked, but
they were ranked. They were like low teens, early high 20s, something like that.
Yeah, because they definitely should not have won that game.
Yeah, but Johnny had his Heisman moment. Just super fun. First freshman ever win the Heisman. Just ridiculous. Number 2, this is kind of where I was saying that I started watching college football in 2006. Vince Young. I'm not a Texas fan, but that 2006 Rose Bowl national championship game will forever to me be the best college football game of all time. USC was so dominant for 3 years. You had the top 2 in the Heisman voting, and you had third was Vince Young. So you had the 3 best players in college football on the game. You had in Southern California, in the Rose Bowl, which is the most famous stadiums in all of college football. And Vince Young leads the underdog Texas to upset USC and win the national title. I'll never forget that last run when he gets 4th down. He scrambles out of the pocket and he walks into the end zone with like 15 seconds left. It upsets USC. I'll never forget that. That was it got me into college football to begin with. And then number 1, this is the first bias pick I have. And the first, because as being a Kentucky and UCF fan, I never really had much to root for in college football. 2017 though, McKenzie Milton. I know the guy. I've talked to him before. We're at school and everything. McKenzie Milton in 2017, 2018, really established himself as my favorite college football player ever. Started really caring about him as not just a player, as a person. Everything I hear about him is a great guy. Nice guy to talk to too. And the man led UCF to an undefeated season. I really do think they would have been back-to-back undefeated seasons and would have had a chance in the playoff if McKenzie Milton doesn't get hurt against USF in 2018. I think that the playoff would have kind of had to put him in. But, I remember all the UCF faithful getting literally just crying before McKenzie when he almost lost his leg and almost died because of losing so much blood and clotting of blood. But yeah, he's a guy that UCF fans, myself included, will consider probably the greatest quarterback in UCF history and one of the most lovable human beings in UCF history. So he's my number 1.
Fair. Yeah, he was definitely electric in 2017. He was a fun player to watch before he got hurt, and then UCF, like you said, almost went back to back. And then the legend of Joe Burrow was created from that monster hit from your defensive player. Thank you for that.
That literally was what changed it all.
That created Joe Burrow.
Yep. All right, now on to the NFL. We're going to the next level. I can go ahead and start this one. So I'm just gonna preface this by saying I did not realize how many receivers I was gonna have on this list until I finished doing it. I'm not usually huge on receivers. I think a lot of them are divas, but that being said, a lot of my favorite players ever are very diva-like. And also, so kind of different than college football. College football, I feel like, are because I never really had too much to root for growing up. I didn't have too much bias in there. I will tell you, the NFL stuff's gonna have a lot of Minnesota Vikings stuff in here. So my honorable mention is Larry Fitzgerald. I think he's just a classic professional. He's the complete opposite from what the receiver diva thing is. I think he's the complete opposite. Just comes in, does his job, but people forget how flippin' athletic Larry Fitzgerald was as a young guy. He was a top 5 pick for a reason at receiver. There's a reason for that because he was just an athletic freak. But he was able to evolve his game and just fantastic guy. Plus, he's a Minnesota native, so that's kind of cool. He grew up a Vikings fan, and I've kind of really hoped he would end his career in Minnesota. But number 5, Stephon Diggs. If you watched our previous podcast about the favorite moments in sports history, you'll understand why Stephon Diggs is my favorite player. Minneapolis Miracle, that catch, him throwing his helmet will always be in my mind as my favorite moment ever as a sports fan before the Braves win the World Series. That was moment.
Sorry, not to interrupt you. I was saying that's one of the most amazing single plays I've ever seen in NFL history, and definitely top 3 for sure. I mean, that was just so unpredictable. I mean, he could have went out of bounds and kicked the field goal to win the game, right? They were only down
only down 1.
Down 1, yeah. But he decided, oh my gosh, there's no one around me. I'm just gonna go score.
Made it that one. I mean, he's a legend forever. I mean, there's a lot of Vikings fans that don't like him because of how he got out of Minnesota. I think that what we've been proven ever since he left, and Justin Jefferson being as good as he is and still not been able to do much as a team, because I think Diggs has just kind of been proven right. So I mean, there's no hard feelings for me with him. He's made me a moment I'm always going to remember. Number 4, I got Deion Sanders. A guy I didn't really get to watch too much, but his highlights are just ridiculous. He's the greatest DB of all time.
Deion.
Just an amazing character. Like, you can listen to Deion Sanders talk for hours and never get tired of it because he's just hilarious. But he was one of the guys. He was one of the only guys that talk a ton of trash, but every single time found a way to back it up. So,
fun fact about Deion Sanders: he's the only player to ever start in a World Series game and a Super Bowl game.
Mm-hmm. He also played in the NLDS and a playoff game in the same week. So played in the NLDS and then played in an NFL game in the same day, back to back. Like, he was gonna play, but then Bobby Cox got mad at him and he benched him. But he was still in the dugout during that game, so pretty cool. At number 3, Calvin Johnson. He killed the Vikings every year that we played him, but again, kind of like Larry Fitzgerald, consummate professional. Never heard any crap about him. Feel horrible he was in Detroit his whole career because I wonder what he could do somewhere else. But him and Matt Stafford were just electric together. I mean, Stafford he only has one of the strongest arms in the history of the game. To go up to a guy that's 6'5" and runs faster than runs like a 4.3, just did some stuff. And there's a reason he's called Megatron, because he was like a robot. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, he's definitely in the top, receivers I've ever watched in person. Him and Matthew Stafford, that was such a, unique connection that Detroit couldn't do anything more than, the first round of the playoffs with those two. And I mean, look what Stafford's doing now. Cooper Kupp's the number 1 receiver now. It's not just by, by chance. It's because he has Matthew Stafford now as his quarterback. I mean, Kupp's a great receiver, don't get me wrong, but I mean, Goff to Stafford turned him into the number 1 fantasy receiver. So,
Yeah, Calvin though. I mean, look what Calvin did. He did it with Detroit, and before that, he did it at Georgia Tech in college. I mean, the guy was just another level. He made everyone better around him, and he's just a freak of nature. Number 2 is Adrian Peterson, huge Vikings fan, and in 2007, his rookie year when he rushed for 250 something yards in a game, just a ridiculous. The guy, I think he's a top 5 back of all time, and knowing that he did most of his career in Minnesota, I mean, just he was. I remember getting mad when we picked him at first because I wanted a quarterback, aka Brady Quinn. I was wrong. I was a kid, but the guy proved us wrong the first year he's in the league, and he had the 2,000-yard year where he was 9 yards away from breaking the record, and led us with Christian Ponder at quarterback, led us to the playoffs. Just insane. And then number 1, I think the greatest receiver of all time. Most people think Jerry Rice. I don't think so. Randy Moss, the most talented receiver of all time. And I believe if he had the quarterback play of a Jerry Rice, that he would have been better than Jerry Rice. He was a crisp route runner. He was faster than everybody else, taller than everybody else, could jump higher than everybody else, and ran better routes than the defense could cover. And that's why they call it mossing somebody. And his hands were just soft as butter. Like he could literally catch anything. There's a reason they call it mossing somebody when you go up and catch over somebody, because he literally did that every single week. Randy Moss, Vikings legend. I would even say Patriots legend as well. Just continually just did it over and over and over again. Yeah, he had his issues, but Lord, I mean, a lot of people hate him for mooning the Packers. Knowing how much I hate the Packers, I loved it. But yeah, what about your top 5? What do you have to say about mine?
For your top 5, I mean, for Randy Moss, I definitely have him in there, and I'll talk about that in a sec. But let's start. Okay, actually, let's just go back to Randy Moss. Randy Moss, in my opinion, was, like you said, I also have him as my top receiver all the time. Just watching him, just doing what he did. He had to, like Rice said, Rice had 2, Hall of Fame quarterbacks. He would be this undisputed number 1 all time. And
Randy Moss, one last thing about him. From a Vikings fan perspective, he made if you go back and look at some old Maddens, he made Dante Culpepper have a higher rating than Peyton Manning in a Madden game. Just going to leave it at that. I'm not going to talk any farther from that, but just saying.
And Megatron, like I said, he was definitely one of the top receivers I've ever watched other than Randy Moss. I mean, obviously Jerry Rice, I didn't see him play, but in terms of receivers I've watched, I would say Calvin was probably – I'd probably put Calvin at 3. I'd put someone else at 2, and I'll get to him in a sec. But so my top 6, also AP, to kind of piggyback off your top 5 with your honorable mention. I think AP definitely one of the top running backs I ever got to see in the NFL as well. Just pure talent, just pure will, pure talent as a running back, pure skill, pure vision. He didn't really have much to deal with, and he still wasn't. If his coach at the time would have called the timeout, he was running so well in that game. He would have. I'm pretty sure they had 2 timeouts at that point.
They had 2 timeouts. They had 2 timeouts down by less than a field goal, and they were 12 yards from the end zone. And they just decided to let the time tick out, call timeout, and kick a field goal to win it. But
I would at least get involved 2 more times, and let's see if you can try to do it.
Same,
but that's, I guess he was content with that. But my top 5, my honorable mention is a player that means a lot to me as a fan. I actually have his jersey as a Falcons fan, and he is the quarterback of the biggest collapse in NFL history, Matt Ryan. Still have my jersey. I will rep that jersey till I die. Still my favorite quarterback of all time. Got to stay loyal to a team kind of thing. But yeah, he was just, it's never really been his fault for the Falcons. I mean, he's only been in the playoffs, 4 or 5 times maybe? No, maybe 5 or 6. But yeah, I'd say maybe 6. But still, I mean, the years that they don't make the playoffs, they only win like 4 or 5 games. So, and most of the time it's really not him. I mean, if you send him to Pittsburgh next year, if you send him to San Fran, I know San Fran has Trey Lance, but if you send him to a team that's like kind of in a weird transition kind of year, like their quarterback situation's fuzzy at this moment, Matt Ryan could probably go in there and prove that year one. I think he's still that quarterback. The Falcons are 6-7, either a 7th seed or in the hunt right now for the playoffs. I mean, I kind of want I want Matt Ryan to win the Super Bowl, and I don't think it's going to be in Atlanta. I think they need to rebuild a little more. So I think they should trade him. But my number 5 is a Sheriff. Peyton Manning.
Oh,
Omaha Sheriff. Forehead. I don't know what you want to call him, but it's Peyton Manning. So, yeah, just watching him, he's definitely kind of even as a Georgia fan, I mean, I've heard the stories of him at Tennessee, obviously owning Georgia for years, but even NFL, he was just so much fun to watch. He's so intelligent. He's basically a coach on the field. Kind of like Tom Brady. He's an offensive coordinator on the field. Literally would change the lines, change the plays at the line of scrimmage constantly. He was just a unique player. And then, he got a second. He rode off in the sunset, got a second ring, with the defense of Denver kind of got a second ring.
yes.
With they pretty much won that Super Bowl for him with he had pure leadership. His arm was pretty much already shot at that point. But it's just his pure leadership and just doing just enough as a quarterback won him that Super Bowl. And number 4 for me, I kind of changed my list up a little bit since you and I talked. My number 4 is actually Luke Kuechly, linebacker out of Carolina. You and I talked about him retiring in his late 20s. Would still in his prime, with still plenty of football left. And I don't know, I just feel like he's to me, he's just one of the best linebackers I've ever seen in person. My number 3, Julio Jones, who I think is the second best receiver I've seen behind Randy Moss. I actually biased him above Calvin. I think Julio's route running was better than Calvin's. Calvin was more physical than Julio, but Julio in terms of he'll touch a ball and go 70 yards. Calvin's didn't seem as fast as Julio, in my opinion. Like, yeah, he may have been just as fast, but his burst, Julio would take a slant and just go around the defense and just scamper an end zone. I mean, Calvin was more just he's gonna be double teamed, so just throw the ball up and he'll just go and snatch it, kind of thing. But yeah, Julio is definitely number 3. And my number 2 is you and I talked about. I think is the best receiver of all time, Randy Moss. Like we talked about with Jerry Rice, his 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks that were thrown to him. Randy Moss, he only had 1 year of he's going to be a future Hall of Famer in Tom Brady, but the 1 year that he had Tom Brady throwing to him, they went 18-1, and the only game they lost was in the Super Bowl because David Tyree caught a helmet catch, which is still the craziest catch I've ever seen in my life. Caught the ball 45 yards downfield off his helmet. It's absolutely ridiculous. And that robbed Randy Moss of a Lombardi trophy. And then my number 1, he played in Atlanta, and who knows what would have happened if he stayed and didn't get caught in some controversy. But Mike Vick, the most electric player. I've seen highlights. I saw him vaguely when I first started watching football, was right as he kind of got in that mix, that mess of stuff. But man, Michael Vick, and when he came back with the Eagles, he was still good. He still had a couple of good years there in Philadelphia. But in his time in Atlanta, he was a different animal. He was just so much fun to watch. He literally had a Mike Vick experience that people could go to and experience how Michael Vick would run the ball. If it doesn't tell me how important you are as a player on the game of the sport that you play, that pictures it right there.
When I think about Mike Vick, Madden 04 comes to mind, the most dominant Madden player of all time. You literally get Mike Vick and you run out of the pocket and just chuck it deep every single time. And it worked every time because Mike Vick was
or you just run right around the defense.
Exactly.
Either one.
I think that Mike Vick is, if he wouldn't have gotten into the dogfighting thing, he would be a Hall of Famer today. There's no doubt in my mind. That thing really did. It took years away from his career. Plus, it caused a lot of people to really dislike the guy. He definitely rehabilitated his life in general. But that being said, that still does hold weight amongst Hall of Fame voters for sure.
Yeah, he I think I'm not sure if Atlanta would have won the Super Bowl, but they definitely could have been back in the NFC Championship game.
Oh yeah, for sure. But yeah, I mean, I think the only last thing I'll say on the NFL, one guy that I'm gonna leave this honorary mention. A lot of people hate the guy. I personally like the guy. He's had his issue. He's had his questionable things, but goodness, it's the GOAT. Tom Brady. I mean, like him, love him, hate him. I know you don't like him because he came back from 28-3, but
Yeah,
just feel like he's gotten so much more likable in Tampa. I think
I think he maybe even gotten better. It sounds crazy, but he's like the number one
I don't think he's
fantasy.
gotten better, but I feel like he's actually has receivers. He's not had
Yeah,
he's not had a receiver and he's doing. Like he made
massive.
Julian Edelman and Wes Welker the best slot receivers in the league during their careers. Julian Edelman and Wes Welker, a former quarterback and a 7th-round pick from the Dolphins that they cut. That was who he made the best slot receivers in the league. In the 1 year he has Randy Moss, he goes out and breaks every record in the books. I mean, Tom Brady is just, I love watching the guy play, even though he's just, people hate him. He has the Deflategate stuff, which was way over hype, by the way. That's ridiculous. He got such a big deal about it.
Just because it's Tom Brady.
That's the
But
only.
yeah, I mean, it's like our dad's watching MJ. We're watching the greatest of all time in Tom Brady. And at this point, like ever since he left New England the last year or two, I've just been just sitting back. Yeah, he beats the Falcons every time he plays them, but that's beside the fact. It's just sitting there watching greatness because I'm like, this isn't going to be around much longer. I mean, I think he came out and said recently he can see himself retiring this year or something along those lines.
I think he'll play till he's 45. There's not been any signs of slowing down, but it could be.
Yeah, I think, but I believe I saw a comment he had the other day. Like he said, he can see this potentially being his last year. Like he said, it's probably unlikely, but he said he can still see it being his last year. But Tom Brady's just he's different, man.
I mean, I've gotten to the point with Brady where it's just like anytime when we are watching a game, if I see that the Bucks are down by a score down by a field goal or down by 4 with $1:30 left and but the Bucks have the ball, I'm like, let me turn on and watch this comeback because we know it's going to be a comeback.
He just has that it factor, the ice in his veins, the MJ, the Kobe. It's you can't teach that. It's instincts, and it's honestly so annoying because I've seen my team lose times.
Most people have. All right, but going off MJ and Kobe stuff that you just mentioned, let's get into the NBA. Who are your players for your NBA?
So I didn't get to see MJ play, but I have to throw MJ in my honorable mentions just because it's Michael Jordan. It wouldn't be a global game today if it wasn't for Michael Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
What's this? I mean, especially when the Olympics came around in '92, when the Dream Team. I mean, with MJ, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Patrick Ewing,
that whole team.
Team. I mean, everyone that team's a Hall of Famer. Charles Barkley. I could go on and on. Stockton, whatever. All those guys. MJ, like Tom Brady, literally had the it factor and the greatest of all time.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not in my top 5 because these are most of these players I've actually seen. And I mean, my number 5 I haven't seen, but he's also just one of those players kind of like MJ that just could outwork everyone. He wasn't as skilled as MJ, but he would outwork you in Larry Bird. I mean, I've just seen so many highlights of Larry Bird growing up, and I've heard so many stories. I just put in my top 5. His career would have lasted a lot longer than it did if he didn't put his body on the line every game. But that's what made him so great. And for me, my personal favorite player is at number 4 with Dirk Nowitzki. He's like my second NBA jersey I ever got. I mean, he's a 7-footer that doesn't look like he should be as good as he is. I mean, he's gonna be a Hall of Famer. He won a ring. He won Dallas their only ring. He was drafted by the team in the late '90s with Steve Nash, a really good duo. And then he didn't have a single All-Star on his team when he probably made the single greatest NBA history run in the playoffs. He beat Westbrook and Durant, Kobe Bryant. Who else did he beat? He beat the Trailblazers, I believe. I think he beat the Trailblazers in the first round.
Oh, yeah, it was the Trailblazers first round. Yeah.
It was Trailblazers,
Mhm.
Thunder,
Yeah, because
Lakers.
that was the year the Spurs got knocked out by the Grizzlies, by the 8 seed Grizzlies. That's right.
Yeah, and then they beat LeBron in the Big Three in Miami,
Their first year
and he
together.
had 0 other All Stars on his team.
Yeah,
That's
nuts.
what makes it absolutely insane and just ridiculous. That I mean, it's iconic, that turnaround fadeaway jump shot. I mean, there's so many. I've seen it even watching a few college games. I've seen it a handful of times. I mean, it's when you're that big, when you're 7-footer, no one's gonna block that.
Just with the
When
wrong.
yeah, when you're leaning back and you're 7 foot, no one's touching the ball.
Exactly.
Not even Chris Bosh at like 6'10", or I can't. Yeah, Bosh, what, 6'10"
Yeah.
ish. Yeah, 6'10". He wasn't even close to touching it. But my number 3, maybe one of the most influential players in the game of basketball, and who has, in my opinion, the best handles of all time, and Allen Iverson. AI was. He doesn't. Not many players at 6 foot, 6'1", 6'2" can take your team almost single-handedly to the NBA Finals. I mean, Dirk being 7'1" had a better team even than AI did that year. And he was just, I mean, everyone wanted to be AI. There was kids at games that were dressed like AI all the time. He was just a global phenomenon, and he was fun to watch. I mean, I remember watching him when he was in Denver. I didn't get to watch him. I don't remember as much when he was in Philly, but I remember a lot when he was in Denver, like towards the end of his career. He was still super fun to watch. And for me, number 2, talking about kind of going back to the whole football thing in terms of pure dominance, is Shaquille O'Neal.
Got a little Shaq.
One of the funniest people I have just watched in general. Like, he's just such a funny character. He has so many funny
He's a huge goofball.
Yeah, I saw him on something with Bear Grylls, Man versus Wild with Bear Grylls. That was the funniest episode I've ever seen. But yeah, Shaq was just so dominant when I wish they would have never got rid of him in Orlando as a Magic fan. I wish he would have been able to stay there, but beside the fact. But yeah, in LA, he's won 4 rings, 3 in LA and 1 in Miami. He's just such a great player. And then the late great Kobe Bryant, in my opinion, number 1. Going back to that Tom Brady instinct, that kind of, I mean, they really call it the Mamba mentality. He just would take over games and win when he had to. And there's not many players that can do that. There's only select players in almost any sport that can and have been able to do that throughout their careers. No one exemplifies that as much as Kobe Bryant, and RIP Kobe. But man, he was fun to watch, and he beat my Magic in NBA Finals too. So for me to say that, that's a lot. That takes a lot for me. But yeah, what do you think about that? And what are your top 5?
I don't have any issues with this. I mean, those players are just legends. I have a couple of the same people on my list too. My list is a little bit different than yours, though. I mean, honorable mention, I do have Kobe. Only reason I don't have him in my top 5 is I'm a Celtics fan. And he did beat us in 2010. We did beat him in 2008, but he did beat us in 2010. But just, it's hard for me to root for a Laker. But yeah, Kobe, especially as he started getting older and like toward the end of his career, started kind of growing a lot more respect for the guy and seeing like how good he truly was. And you see kind of a progression of him as a person too. He used to be a very brash, annoying guy coming straight out of high school to where by the end of his career, he's one of the most well-respected and like appreciated players ever.
Yeah.
So I think that Kobe is my honorable mention. Would be in my top 5 if it wasn't for a couple of these guys I just really love. Number 5, Michael Jordan, just kind of, you already kind of mentioned it when you were in your honorable mention, just legend, greatest player of all time. And just the game's not what it is today without him or anywhere near it. And Kobe is not what Kobe is without Michael Jordan's influence at first. So I think that Michael Jordan it would be criminal for me not to put him top 5. Because if I love the NBA, I gotta love Michael Jordan for pushing it as far up as he did.
Yeah, it says a lot going 6 for 6 in the NBA Finals. That's an insane stat. I mean,
the guy retired for 2 years to play baseball, then came back and won a ring the next year. Like, it doesn't make any sense, but he did.
And then think about, I mean, I'm not trying to talk too much, not trying to jump in here, but Brady has won 7 out of 10 rings. Jordan went 6 for 6. What do you think is more impressive?
I think a 7 out of 10 is because you got there 10 times. It's just ridiculous. But I mean, it's
You
also
gotta-
it's different sports too. I mean, Jordan had to get over that hump with the Celtics in the 80s and then over the Pistons in the late 80s. So he had to get over those humps before he could get there. But once he got there, he was unstoppable. But number 4, I've got Tim Duncan. I just have always respected Tim Duncan. I mean, if you haven't realized by a lot of my lists so far, I really do respect the guys that kind of just go in, do their job, and are a good ambassador for the game.
like
I
Freddie
feel like Tim
Freeman.
Duncan. I feel, huh?
Like Freddie Freeman.
We'll get to that in the MLB.
You're like,
But,
yes.
but I respect those guys a lot. And Tim Duncan, I feel like it's just the perfect face of a franchise. They don't talk too much. They just kind of get their job done, perform. And people forget how dominant he truly was, I feel like, just because of how quiet he was. Number 3 is the complete opposite of Tim Duncan, but Kevin Garnett. Same position. This is my Celtics fandom. His anything is possible speech after he won the 2008 interview after he won the 2008 NBA Finals sent chills to my spine to this day. And just passion is when I think of Kevin Garnett, I think about passion. Just literally just straight up passion in the game. There's nothing else that you can really say about Kevin Garnett. He was dominant, but I think just how he played and how hard he played just speaks volumes for KG. Number 2, Allen Iverson for me. He was my favorite player of all time up until the mid 2010s, which is who my number 1 is going to be. But AI, just the handles, the persona. I mean, kind of one of the only bad guys that I really, really liked. Just because he was, I mean, he was the little guy. He was lucky to be 6 foot, and he was like listed as 6'1", 6'2". But if you look at him, he's compared to other guys that are 6 foot tall, he's about that size or even shorter. But he carried the team he won multiple scoring titles, carried the team to the NBA Finals. His second best player was a aging Dikembe Mutombo or a not very good Aaron McKee. So that team went to the NBA Finals and won a game in the NBA Finals too. And the step over Tyronn Lue will be always legendary. So Iverson's my number 2. And my number 1, Steph Curry. He's just a lovable guy. He's a very lovable guy. I didn't like the whole situation with when KD came there, but that's not Steph's fault. KD wanted to go there because Steph is just that fun to play with. And Steph Curry, his whole story from Davidson all the way getting to the league. I literally said in that 2008 NCAA tournament, Steph Curry is going to be a star in the league. He's fun. I'm going to follow this guy for a while. And following him from the moment he gets into the NBA, struggles a little bit his rookie and second year. And then 2011 kind of starts getting better and better and better. And then 2014 will be the year that I will say that Steph Curry became my favorite player in the league. It was the year where they went out there and upset the Nuggets. And Steph Curry dropped 40 in the playoffs 2 or 3 times that series. And he was still kind of just a lot of guys people still didn't really know who he was very much. And he kind of just took that step. And then 2015, when they won the championship against the Cavs, I was rooting so hard for the Warriors. So, I mean, from that, I mean, and also he just broke the 3-point record of all time, breaking Ray Allen's record, who actually was almost on my list as well. But yeah, Steph Curry is just, I love the guy. Great guy, great ambassador for the game, and just, again, another guy that revolutionized the game. We're living in a world that before Steph Curry, you were lucky to see a team take 15 threes a game. Now, if you're lucky if you don't see, it's a shocker if you don't see a game where one player takes 15 threes a game. So just revolutionized the game.
Yeah, it's definitely different now with Steph Curry, but back to the whole AI thing, like you're talking about, he's kind of bad guy mentality, but he was an underdog, which made him more likable. I think that was his height and everything. He shouldn't have been nearly as good as he was.
He was a walking contradiction, but it was a level.
Yeah.
All right, now on to the MLB. Admittedly, this is a sport that both of us, I feel like, kind of gotten into a little bit later than we want to do. I've always watched a little bit of baseball, but nowhere near what I do now. At this point, I'd probably say it's either my favorite or second favorite sport at this point, just how much I got in the Braves this past year. But the list that I have, there's reasons that I have who I have where I'm at. So, but my honorable mention is Dale Murphy. Braves legend, should be a Hall of Famer. It's a crime he's not a Hall of Famer. He's my dad's favorite player. Just again, another great ambassador for the Braves to this day. Braves fans love him. He's got a restaurant in Atlanta called Murph's. I mean, the guy's a lovable guy, great human being, won 2 MVPs in Atlanta on really, really, really bad Braves teams too. Without him, I don't think the Braves get to what they're at in the 90s because he at least brought some fans in the stadium to where Ted Turner felt he could spend money. So, I mean, Dale Murphy had a lot more impact. Plus, he has all the stuff that he does for the special needs children. It's an awesome thing. So, Dale Murphy's my honorable mention.
Real quick, not to jump in the middle of your lineup, but working with the Braves this year, there was a girl that I work with that walked right past Dale Murphy and was having a conversation with him, and didn't realize it was Dale Murphy. That same girl did the same thing with Andrew Jones.
Wow.
Right next to his Gold Glove, which is downstairs in the chop house, Ottoman Chop.
That's actually another guy that would have been one of my honorable mentions as well, Andrew Jones. Just gonna say this. Hall of Fame voters, put him in the Hall of Fame. He's the greatest defensive center fielder of all time and almost has 500 homers. So put him in the Hall of Fame, please. Okay, moving past that. Number 5 for me, Albert Pujols. My grandfather was a big Cardinals fan growing up. No, like when I was growing up, grandfather was a huge Cardinals fan. Albert Pujols is just a legend. People need to realize what we're watching when we watch Albert Pujols. This guy is a top 15 to 20 player of all time, which is saying a lot for baseball. So, I mean, he's just a legend. He's won multiple rings for the Cardinals. 2011 was what got me back into baseball to start with. That whole World Series run from the Cardinals was so awesome to watch, especially Game 6. And Pujols, people remember David Freeze's hits. Pujols had a couple of huge hits to keep him in it too. So yeah, Pujols is my number 5. Number 4, Hank Aaron. Never watched Hank Aaron play because I'm 22. But I mean, just a legend. I mean, he took what Jackie Robinson did when it comes to the race barrier and color barrier and took it to the next step. Just showed what he could do. Showed what African American players could do, and did it in a very respectful and loving way. Just awesome to watch. Atlanta legend, well, Milwaukee legend as well. One of the best ambassadors ever for the game, and one of the greatest players ever. Top 5 player of all time. And number 3 for me is Freddie Freeman. This is a current, coming from a World Series win, stuck with the Braves through their whole rebuild that they put him through. Has not left yet. Hopefully he doesn't leave. But even if he does leave, he's still one of my favorite players of all time. But just he's been everything that a franchise deserves, needs. He's been a leader. He's been a great face. He's been a good mix between PC to where you don't say something you're going to regret, but also still being a normal human being to where he's not just saying stuff just to say stuff, but he's a very legitimate human being, great guy. So I just love Freddie Freeman. Number 2, my favorite Brave of all time, Chipper Jones. 20 years in Atlanta. Played the hot corner the whole time. Like playing third base the whole time for a 20-year career. There are 2 ACL injuries. Wins a World Series his rookie year. I mean, wins multiple MVPs. Just Chipper Jones is a Braves. Spends his whole career in Atlanta. Braves legend. Favorite player of all time. My first jersey ever from a baseball player. And then my number 1 will be a guy I also had a jersey for around the same time I got my Chipper Jones jersey. Never played for the Braves, but he's my favorite player of all time. Another guy revolutionized the game, made the game cool, while also being a top 5 player. I think he's top 3 player of all time. I think he's the best player from the steroid era, and he never used steroids. It's King Griffey Jr. I wear my hat backwards literally because King Griffey Jr. made that popular. I mean, no one really wore baseball hats backwards. And King Griffey Jr. comes out and does it in a home run derby. And it's like, that's kind of cool. And then just a legend, the guy with the most beautiful swing of all time. When you got shoes with Nike, with your number and your swing as your logo, that's freaking awesome. And then just an awesome legend, second generation player to play through the steroid era, dominate like he did, and never use steroids. And also, great story. My dad went golfing one time and accidentally got put in the same group as King Griffey Jr. And King Griffey Jr. just stuck with him the whole time. My dad played a whole 18 round of golf with King Griffey Jr. and got all my. So now I have a rookie King Griffey Jr. card signed by him. It's one of my most prized possessions. I cannot say enough about how much I love King Griffey Jr. My favorite player of all time. Just not even close.
I mean, he also, King Griffey Jr., just, of his greatness, he played as well. And the things he did with a team like Seattle,
Yeah.
he's never really had a ton of success. So to do that is very impressive.
I wish he would have gotten a ring. He deserved it, but so happens he played.
Yeah, and then for Freddie Freeman's, like we were talking about earlier, speaking of athletes that go in and get the job done and not really say much and say the right things and do the right things for their organization, which is one of the main reasons why he needs to be signed by the Braves, but that's a different podcast for a different day. But hopefully in the next couple of months we're celebrating a Braves podcast so we can talk about Freddie Freeman going in that team. But just class. I've seen him on the field. I've walked right past him. Very tall individual. Didn't realize he was that tall. First time I was like, oh my God, that's Freddie Freeman. He's like 6'6", 6'5". That man's enormous. But then Chipper Jones, my favorite Brave to this day. I mean, Freddie Freeman, well, for me now it may be tied. Actually, I may like Freddie more. But in terms of the first Brave I really fell in love with was Chipper Jones. I'm going to just jump in my list. So for my honorable mentions, Andrew Jones is definitely in there, the center fielder for the Braves. He's if you're a Braves fan, I mean, he's an iconic. He goes a lot of games. He's an important alumni to the Braves. Very good player for years. He was with the organization for a decent amount of time. Very much success. Won division titles. Went to a World Series. Lost a World Series. So, another guy I threw two guys in my honorable mentions. Barry Bonds as well. I mean, I know he did steroids, but we talked about earlier to hit 73 home runs, even with steroids or not, that's insane. That's absolutely a ridiculous stat. To just play for, as long as he did and dominate. I mean, what if he wouldn't have done the steroids that he did? Would he still put up as good as numbers? I mean, he probably would have good numbers. But I don't know if he would have been the same guy that he is today. But a left-hander that I'm actually throwing my top 5 that you probably wouldn't think I would throw in there, Clayton Kershaw. Pitcher for the Dodgers. Just that he just kept fighting every single year. I mean, he struggled in the playoffs here and there, and for the Dodgers to finally get over that hump. I mean, they probably should have won it in 2017. The Astros cheated, besides the fact. And they won in 2020 and beat the Rays in 6, and he finally got his ring, and the Braves beat him this year. He wasn't playing, but still, we'll count it. But yeah, he's been such a good player, such a good pitcher for so long. He's been very good in regular season. Had his very ups and very downs of playoff baseball. Number 4, I have to throw him in there. The Hammer and Hank Aaron. He's just, like we were talking about earlier, just what he did for the game of baseball in terms of mixing in, going through what he had to go through in the 60s with the race and everything, and becoming that icon that people can look to and say, I can do that same thing regardless of what I look like and who I am. He revolutionized the game, and Hank Aaron will always be remembered for that. Kind of like Jackie Robinson. I mean, there's two guys that definitely revolutionized the game for the good. And I mean, he is very, very well loved still in Atlanta. I mean, that scene, and when Hank Aaron's son threw the first pitch to Freddie Freeman in the Game 3 of the World Series, I mean,
It was awesome.
that was something I'll never forget, watching that in person. That was really, really cool. And that was a huge moment for baseball and for the Braves, obviously, the organization. Having someone of that much impact pitching to one of the biggest Braves legends, or probably now they won the World Series, he's an Atlanta legend forever in Freddie Freeman. And number 3, someone that the Braves actually bumped out of the playoffs in the NLCS. He's towards the end of his career, and you have him in your list as well. Albert Pujols, a guy that I just remember for years, being in the league as long as I can remember, as long as I've been a sports fan. It feels like he's been there for my whole life at 23 years old. And he just seems like a likable guy. Albert just seems like a cool guy just to go hang out with. He's just been such a great baseball player and ambassador for the game as well. And number 2, I gotta go Chipper Jones. As a kid growing up, he was my first baseball jersey as well. A really impressive player to watch. Like you said, third base, came out hot almost every game for 20 years, and he still won a World Series. Did all things he had to do. He was just, even after turning, like you said, after turning his ACL twice, he was still the focal point of that franchise for years. And wherever you go, you see 10 in Atlanta. I mean, he's still popular jersey to this day. I mean, but with number 1, I gotta go the new king of the Braves, Freddie Freeman. Number 5, King Freddie. And just seeing him, be a part of the organization to rebuild for 10 or 13 years, and finally him winning that championship when he put his arms in the air when he caught that game sealing out. It's definitely a moment I know he'll never forget. Atlanta will never forget. We'll never forget. Obviously, our FaceTiming when we saw that scene. That was something that still gives me chills just talking about it. But yeah, so now we're going into our top athletes, favorite players of any sport. Do you want to start us off with that? Or do you want to kind of piggyback off what I said with baseball?
I mean, I can piggyback off of what you say a little bit. I mean, again, kind of with the Freddie stuff. Yeah, Freddie, that image of him, it's kind of crazy. Freddie not only did it in the World Series, did it the series before against the Dodgers, which I'll remember that one just as much as I will the World Series one. I know that sounds crazy, but just when it was the same celebration both times. Same exact thing. Raised his arms in the air after a Swanson play. But just that picture against the Dodgers, considering the highs and the lows emotionally that Game 6 had, that the lows that Luke Jackson almost blows it, and the highs that Matzik comes in and gets it, and then they end up getting out of it and winning it. I'll just remember those two scenes forever. Very same picture, but just amazing moments. I remember the feelings forever. And Freddie, even if he does leave, I hope he doesn't. Praying he doesn't. He needs to be a Brave forever, but money does talk, and if the Braves aren't willing to cough it up, so be it. But no matter what, he's a Braves legend forever. There will not be any hate thrown towards Freddie Freeman, no matter what happens. If anything's going to be to Braves ownership, is not going to be toward Freddie Freeman. The guy's a legend, and he's going to be loved. He's going to be, no matter where he goes, and be pulling for him, unless it's the Dodgers. But if he goes anywhere else except there, I'll be pulling for him. So, but yeah, so we can go into the overall athletes. We are going to do an honorable mention for this because obviously, assuming that these 5 that we choose are our favorite athletes, the other ones that we've already listed that are not on this list will probably be considered honorable mentions that are our favorite athletes. So I do have a couple of these that are not in the sports we've done, but I have three that are, and then two that are not. Number 5, I've got Adrian Peterson. No, number 2 NFL player. So yes, I do have Randy Moss on the list somewhere. But Adrian Peterson, again, kind of talked about him earlier. He was the Vikings of the mid to late 2000s to early 2010s. That he was the Minnesota Vikings, and he was everything that you could ever hope for in a back. He really barely ever got hurt. The one year he tore his ACL, he comes back the next year and almost breaks the rushing record, that's just another level of dominance. If you can come from ACL and then go out there and almost break the rushing record the very next year, it's just ridiculous. I'll never forget just some of the biggest moments of his career. I'll never forget that stiff arm against the Browns his rookie year. Never forget when he broke the rushing single game rushing record against the Chargers. I'll never forget that Green Bay game where he went over the 2,000 mark and should have broken the rushing record. Like, I'll never forget a couple of those things. And that being said, I can't put a number. I would have number 1 if we would have won the Super Bowl in 2009 with Favre in them. He probably would be my number 1, but because of him, we did kind of lose to the Saints, fumbling on the goal line. That was always his biggest issue, was that he did fumble way too much for the number 1 back in the league. But aside from that, just legend, was the Vikings of the 2010s, and just love the guy. And number 4 is Dale Earnhardt Jr. Growing up a big NASCAR fan, growing up in Tennessee, it was kind of you watched that, you watch football, you watch basketball, and watch a little bit of baseball here and there too. But yeah, Dale Jr. was a very, I mean, my Sundays virtually every week would be flipping between Sunday ticket watching the Vikings and flipping to the NASCAR race and seeing where Dale Jr. is running. And just kind of grew up watching. I mean, I grew up watching NASCAR where I learned how to count with the cars. But Dale Jr., I mean, Dale Sr. dying in 2001 kind of made every Dale Sr. fan a Dale Jr. fan. And my dad, and it kind of made everyone more passionate about it. That was a fan of NASCAR to begin with. My dad kind of raised me being a Dale Jr. fan, so I kind of stuck with him through his whole career. A lot of heartbreaking moments, knowing that he never won a title, but also just a great human being. Everyone loves the guy. Funny guy. One of the best podcasts out there too. Number 3, Tiger Woods. I love to go golf, but never would have cared too crass about golf if it wasn't for Tiger Woods. The guy was, if you want to talk about dominance, you can talk about Tom Brady, you can talk about all these guys. If you ask me, the 2 most dominant athletes of all time were Tiger Woods and Michael Phelps, but Michael Phelps only did it once every 4 years. Tiger Woods. So to think about just how dominant Tiger Woods is, there was one year where Tiger Woods won 12% of the tournaments on the tour. And there's like 180 players per tournament. So he beat 179 players 12% of the time. Which that's just ridiculous. It's not, and it's virtually, instead of it being 12 on 12, no, I mean 5 on 5, 11 on 11, it's 1 on 179, and he still consistently beat them over and over and over again. His winning percentage on the PGA Tour was better than the Jacksonville Jaguars' winning percentages this year in football. That's sad for the Jaguars. It's amazing for Tiger Woods. Just another level, ridiculously dominant. Made golf not just the rich white man sport anymore. Now you have random people that actually want to go out there and swing a golf club and have a good time and eventually get good at it too. It's pretty cool. Virtually made a sport popular again. Number 2 is Randy Moss. Again, kind of talked about it a lot already. Greatest receiver of all time in my eyes. And the highlights that you see from Randy Moss are just ridiculous. Like, it's just another level. My number 1 is King Griffey Jr. Once again, kind of was, I mean, I've never went out of my way to find a pair of shoes as I did for a pair of Griffeys. I found a pair of Griffeys on sale one place. It was a size and a half too big, and I still bought them because I wanted a pair of Griffeys that bad. Like, just all the types of things he's done, knowing that I do have a rookie card signed by him, looking at all his highlights, looking at the home run derby with his hat backwards. Just when I think about an athlete that I feel like exemplifies why we love sports. I feel like a good mix between swagger while also maintaining a sense of maturity and professionalism, and while still holding all that together and putting up top 10 numbers of all time. Just I can't look away from that. And if anyone out there hasn't watched many King Griffey Jr. highlights, I beg you to go watch some King Griffey Jr. highlights. The guy's a stud.
I don't know why when you said having swagger and, kind of having a good time and still being professional kind of reminded me of Ozzy Albies from the Briz. I don't know why.
Very similar personalities there.
I mean, he doesn't have the production, but I mean, he's still been an all-star. But that was number one. So I do have a player. He's honorable mention, but he's a sport we haven't mentioned yet. And I may get some slack for this, and this is probably unpredictable too, is Conor McGregor.
Oh.
Conor McGregor has revolutionized the sport of MMA. It would not be nearly as big as say without Conor McGregor.
That's true.
He has put the sport on the map. He's not even the greatest fighter in MMA. He's just the biggest name in the loudest mouth. Khabib is the best fighter, but he wasn't nearly as loud and obnoxious as Conor McGregor.
Yeah.
Conor McGregor, is being the personality he is definitely worth more than any other player, any other fighter in MMA. And I mean, you can ask Dana White, you can ask the owner of UFC right now, who are you most grateful for as a fighter? And he likely would say Conor McGregor.
There's a reason he was on so many main event cards. There's a reason for that. Even if he wasn't the greatest fighter, he was this ticket.
There's a reason why when Floyd and Mayweather decided to box Conor McGregor, they both made over $150 million each.
Yep.
Conor McGregor made close to $200 million just by losing the fight.
Nuts.
Absolutely insane. And for me, growing up and moving to Orlando in 2007, and 2 years later, the Magic went to the NBA Finals. I would say my number 5 is Dwight Howard, just based off those memories growing up as a kid. And I mean, Magic they're really bad now, but back then they were making the playoffs almost every year for at least 5 or 6 years in a row, 7 years in a row. They may get bounced every other round, but they were still consistent.
Going off of Dwight though, he's a weird guy. Don't get me wrong. He's got some weird stories coming out about him.
Yeah, I've heard some weird stories.
The most underrated NBA player of all time. Because people talk crap about him. There's people that don't believe he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. The guy won 3 back-to-back Defensive Player of the Years, was in MVP conversations every year, and led the Orlando Magic to the NBA Finals. A team that literally will not want to pay any money to anybody.
And his best players were Rashard Lewis, Jameer Nelson, and Hedo Turkoglu. Which Hedo Turkoglu actually was my first real jersey ever that I remember wearing. Also, shout out to Hedo. But that's just I just wish Orlando could start paying people. But Dwight Howard's one of those guys that just, at least in Orlando, he kind of put his head down and went to work. And I mean, I don't know, as his career progressed. I mean, he finally won a championship in LA in a COVID year, but it's COVID year. But beside the fact, I mean, yeah, he was in my number 5. Number 4 is someone I didn't watch personally, but I've heard so much about that I could literally tell you almost every single play, toss left, toss right, Herschel Walker, number 4. Don't have to explain too much as a Georgia fan. I mean, he's kind of like their aura. He's just kind of like the face of the program. I mean, he's definitely top 3 running back of all time, if not the best running back in college football of all time. He only played 3 years, and he rushed for about 5,000 yards. And he only played for 3 years. Everyone at Bo Jackson played for 4 years. Almost everyone else that has been close to his record or broke his record has played 4 years. Herschel only played 3. So with that said, I'm going to go number 3. There's a player I have a jersey of in the NBA, and I've already talked about previously, and who was actually, as growing up, even as a Magic fan, still my favorite player to watch, Dirk Nowitzki. I mean, just kind of the underdog, like not really supposed to, he doesn't really look that athletic, but he's just such a force as a 7-footer that, can move kind of like he did and just had that step back that it was just unguardable. and he was just wanting to be part of that organization. He was there for 21 years, had 21 years. And I mean, if anyone ever gets a chance, and this, why not kind of go check it out? Dirk Nowitzki's farewell game at the end of the game, his tribute that he had some of the greatest of all. He had Charles Barkley, Detlef Schrempf, who was one of his favorite players, in Germany. And I'm trying to think of, he had some other real famous. Pretty sure he had Stockton there too at his farewell speech. But yeah, just seems like a great person and a great player. And for me, my number 2 favorite player personally to me, I gotta go with Matty Ice, Matt Ryan, QB1 in Atlanta for the last 12, 15 years. He just is that one guy that I just will always back, regardless of the haters he's always had. I do think it's time to move on from Matt Ryan, but that's not his fault. I think Atlanta just needs to completely rebuild, and that's not his fault. I think he just needs to get out now while he still has 1 or 2 years left on the tank. And then number 1, the new champion, that broke the curse in Atlanta, Frederick Freeman. Freddie. Yeah, my number 1 athlete, right, or my number 1 player, favorite player of all time now is Freddie Freeman officially. I've never seen any of my teams win it, and he's the focal point of that franchise for so long, and he stuck with it and won us a championship. So, Frederick Freeman at number 1.
Gotta love the man. Gotta love him.
Gotta love the guy, and the Braves are absolutely idiots if they decide not to resign him. And that's an edited version of what I could probably say. So, doofuses. There you go. Idiots. Morons. There you go. Yeah, it's ridiculous. They need to resign Freddie Freeman.
For sure. I mean, it's honestly sad that he's not resigned yet. But yeah, I think that I don't see any the list that we have. I mean, there's so many guys that I would say are some of my favorite athletes of all time. And it would be what other guys that to the top of my head, like Anthony Davis at Kentucky was one of my favorites. John Wall at Kentucky was awesome. Some other guys. Huh?
Chicago Bulls, Derrick Rose. Like when Derrick Rose, Chicago. Disgusting.
Ridiculous to watch. Even Rajon Rondo for a couple years in Boston was some of the passes the guy would make were just like mind blowing. I mean, other guys like NFL players that like I freaking love watching Pat Mahomes play. Just some of the stuff that guys can do is just next level. I mean,
someone in college that was really fun to watch too. That he's having an okay career in the NFL right now, but Baker Mayfield. I mean, he really wasn't in the league in the college that long, but he was so much fun to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Had a much better arm than Manziel. Probably wasn't as creative, but his arm was a lot better. I mean, he was just fun to watch. One of those guys. I'll never forget him grabbing himself, I guess, and walking against Kansas that game that was infamous for that, and it was just kind of a weird situation, but that was really odd. But he still won that game, and that was just kind of different. But just it's amazing. I mean, obviously favorite players are not going to be the best and everything, but that's why we love Pius and why we love being fans. But hopefully the Braves can repeat. That's what we're going for.
But yeah, I hope you all enjoy this podcast. I had a great time recording it. Had a great time kind of looking at some of these players and reminiscing a lot about why these players were so impactful to me as a sports fan, why they made me love sports so much. And we'd love to hear your all's listen down below in the comments and see what we could see where you think we were wrong, where you think that there's certain guys that we might have missed out on, and why other players matter to you so much, whether it be because of personal reason or whether it be because of just of how dominant and how fun they were to watch for you. But until then, we'll be back in a couple of weeks with the college football playoff predictions and as well as the NFL podcast once we get back from Tennessee. But until then, Merry Christmas to everybody. And
Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays, whatever y'all celebrate. So see y'all later.